Hi everyone, it's Rosanna, and today I just want to bring you kind of an encouragement video. Um, it's for people who think, because I see this all the time, and I felt it several years ago too. I see all the time in comments, I wish I could draw like you. I wish I could draw, period. I can't draw. Things like that. People say that all the time. And I definitely would have said that 5 years ago. But I'm going to tell you why I think everyone can draw. So let's talk about how I went from being someone who would have said I can't draw to someone who draws pretty much every day now. Okay, so my lighting has changed drastically because I filmed this early in the morning, so it's unnatural light. But anyway, first I'm just going to show you what I typically use for drawing. I started with micron pens. That's what I saw a lot of people using. Then last year or maybe 2 years ago, I went mostly to just a dip pen or a nib pen and India ink, and I like to use the sepia color India ink most of the time, and I do use that Dr. P.H. Martin's Bombay ink usually. And then the last month or two, I've gone from using my dip pen to a very fine point brush, fine tip brush, and my India ink because I feel like my lines can be softer that way, and I can also add a little water as I'm doing it and kind of change the shade of the ink and make it softer. So I'm showing you several designs that I think kind of use techniques that help beginning drawers. One is like folk art and patterns and simplistic designs. Another is collage elements. So that is where, like in this one, I drew the hen's wing at a very strange angle. So I just ended up drawing another wing on a piece of paper, cutting it out, and collaging it in with a few poppy heads, dried poppy heads, and making that into a collage piece. Same thing with this one, this envelope art. I didn't like the way I wrote "one to die." I didn't like the text, which I'm not great at. I'm not good at all at hand lettering, but I try. So I tore out a little piece of envelope that was a similar color, glued it on, and then just did my lettering again and just made it part of the piece. And you can also see the little hen down there is a cutout that I put there because I originally drew one that was too small for the scale of other things. And then on this one, I didn't have a mistake that I covered necessarily, although there's lots of things in the painting that aren't perfect, but like no huge mistakes. But I just thought I'm just going to do the hen separately because that's less stressful for me. If I've already painted a background I'm happy with, I sometimes can get myself worked up about like ruining it. I'm putting air quotes around ruin, but like, so I just drew the hens separately and cut them out and pasted them on, which I think gives a really interesting look because the hens really pop and look slightly dimensional. So I think that's an interesting alternative if you, like me, are intimidated by doing a whole piece all together. Doing the elements separately not only gives you flexibility, but a different look. And then here I was doing a wallpaper design and I put one part in the wrong spot and it was fairly noticeable. So I just patched in a piece of paper and fixed the design that way and made it look like the wall had a crack. And then I'm showing you, I really try to stay away from doing pencil sketches because I notice that when I use a pencil, I make way more mistakes. And I think it's the idea of like, it's like you lose your confidence because you think, oh, I can erase this if I need to, and you, for some reason, I just perform badly with a pencil. So I make myself use ink for most of my drawing because I just find that I do better that way. Now I want to show you like how I just draw on bits of paper, and I've been using a lot of the mail and envelopes and things that we found in that house that we cleaned out last fall, the Pullman house. So I've been doing a lot of envelope art, and then I sketch and things in a sketchbook, and some of these are pages from the sketchbook and some of these are just little bits of watercolor paper that I had left over. and I just fill up the space. Like when I just make, I don't have a lot of time for art every day. Sometimes it's just 15 minutes, sometimes it's an hour or two. But when I have time, I just usually warm up with some little doodles on scratch paper. And most of that just ends up being junk, but as you can see on the other side. But sometimes I get something I really like this little pig head. And so if I do that, then I just set that to the side in a stack of things, and I, try to come back and look through those when I'm making things and use those elements that I like in my art. So it's kind of like the idea of being frugal and thrifty in my making and creating, because my time is so limited that if I do make something that I like to use it, even if I've made it on just scratch paper. So I'm gonna use that little pig head and show you how I work it into this piece today. And that kind of like just goes into the theme of the way I can draw is in my mind, I had to come to terms with the fact that I was just not going to be good at it right away. And that's how most things are for most people. Now, there are genius people out there who are or people who have enormous aptitude for certain things or for many things, and they are sometimes the people who make the rest of us feel like we can't or shouldn't be doing things. But that's not true, because some things, we don't necessarily do because we think we're going to create something like, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Like, that's not why I draw and paint. I know I'm never going to do that, and I don't feel like I need to. I do it because I just, it brings me so much joy to just make a little chicken and cut it out. For some reason, that is one of the most, like, joy-filled, satisfying things that I can do in a day. Now, why that brings me more joy than doing a lot of my other work, I can't rationalize or explain that to you. But that's why I think that kind of dropping our expectations and our ideals of what something should look like, based on, we want to draw because we saw this amazing art that someone made. Well, I mean, you're not going to make art that looks like that right away, chances are. If you're just a normal kind of mortal person who isn't like insanely gifted at many things, then you're not going to start out like that. You're going to have to accept that you're going to have your training wheels on for a while. And I think some of these things like collage or pattern, or like I'm doing right now, drawing a flower that doesn't necessarily look like any flower, or it might remind you of a flower in nature, but it is not a literal interpretation of it. Like, it's not a botanical drawing. And that's where we can get really hung up, because we have the ideal in our mind, and we think that that's where you start, and it's just not. Like, we don't expect that of children. We don't expect that of people learning a new language. So it's silly that our brain kind of will make us feel like, well, that's where we need to start in art or creating. And if we don't show that immediate capacity or talent, or whatever you think, if you don't show that immediately in the first few things you make, then you just shouldn't be doing that. It's like anything. You just have to put some time in. And if you put time in, I promise you're not going to be Michelangelo. You're not going to be Monet. You're not going to be Georgia O'Keeffe. But you'll see some huge improvements. And like, sometimes people say to me, oh, you're so, you're really good at drawing, or you're a really good artist. And I don't know how to even take that or process it. But then my immediate thing in my brain is, I will think, well, no, I'm only good at what I do, at the things I do, like chickens and flowers and pigs in dresses. Those are like, but you know why I'm good at those, or why I'm fairly good at those? Because that's what I've done for like 2 or 3 years. Like, those are my subjects. So like, we just can't expect that we will be good at things that we haven't done. That's not a normal thing that happens for most people. So just lose those expectations. Drop your expectations and just say it's okay. Like I'm just starting at the bottom, just like everybody else does. And maybe some people, you know, they doodled and they drew like all through their childhood. And so, of course, they've got tons more, they have years and years and years of experience on those of us who were so afraid to do it as children that we just really didn't, and then started when we were 20 or 30 or 40 or whatever. So, like, you have to treat yourself like a child in this instance because you are like a child. So, put your training wheels on. And today our training wheels are, and definitely if you feel comfortable using a pencil to do this first, then use your pencil. But what I think is a really effective and simple design for someone to start with is thinking about like making a wallpaper pattern. So maybe go on Pinterest or Google image search and just find a wallpaper pattern you like. And don't pick one, maybe even put like folk art flower pattern or something like that, so that it's going to give you something that's doable. You don't want to find like a rose floral print that's going to be challenging your abilities right at the right at the beginning of when you're trying to draw. So like choose maybe a folk art flower that inspires you, and then just turn that into a wallpaper sort of pattern, repeating pattern. This is like as simple as you can get. So I'm just making kind of squiggly, crinkly flower shapes, which I suppose this is probably a poppy, which is one of my favorite flowers to draw. And usually I would draw them a little bit more realistically, but today, and I'm really lately into folk art type flowers. I don't know, there's something about folk art that is very appealing to me, and I always kind of want to take my art back to something a little bit simpler if I can. So we're just making little crinkly edge circles, and then I'm just putting a little tiny dot in the center and one little kind of half circle at the bottom of each flower, and then I'm just going to do the hyperlapse to fill in the rest. Now, I never measure when I'm doing patterns. You might feel more comfortable. Maybe that would give you some security if you went with pencil and ruler and measured this out, but I just always go by eye. And now I'm thinking, am I going to add something to this pattern? You can see I penciled in a little flower. I can't decide. So what I am going to do is I'm going to ink in a couple and see how they look. And then if I don't, I'm going to put them in a spot where I think I'm going to add an element later, a collage element. So I'm going to just ink in a couple of small flowers and see if I think that adds to this design or not. I have this feeling, and I end up being right, that I don't like it. I just wanted just the big flowers. I think this little flower doesn't really add, but I mean, you could definitely go with whatever design you like. Make it as busy as you want, or you could just add like little kind of, I don't know what you would call those, architectural elements, sort of like dots and squiggly lines like you see in some wallpaper if you wanted to add that. But this, I would say, is more of a primitive style of wallpaper or pattern, and so I decided no, I didn't like that extra, and so I'm just going to put a collage element over that later. But I'm leaving this in because I just want you to see, like, I'm not terrified of ruining anything anymore. Like, I always just think, you know what, I can make this work even if something pretty significant goes wrong or goes off the rails a little bit. I can come back and probably make this into something that's salvageable and I still enjoy. So I'm just encouraging you to be brave, take a few risks, and don't feel like most of the time things are salvageable. They're not a complete loss. And just like I'm showing you, like even if I botched whatever that envelope to the point where I thought, well, I'm not going to use that as my kind of backdrop or whatever, I could still use parts of it. So just don't think of anything as a complete loss. And I think that will help you to not feel like the stakes are so high. And that's a lot of times the main reason we don't try things is because we feel like, oh, there's just so much to lose. We'll lose our time, or we'll be embarrassed, or whatever it is. But like, just always lower the stakes if you can. And or at least that is one of my, I don't know if it's a coping mechanism, but it's a technique and a mechanism I have for just getting through my days and my life, is just lower the stakes if you can, because I am someone who tends to catastrophize. And, really, there's not much in our lives that is as serious as what it feels like in the moment. Most of the time, really, the stakes are pretty low, and things like pig drawings and envelope art are very insignificant in the scheme of things. So just, keep your perspective and don't get overwrought. So I'm just showing you how I use this India ink with water to add a lot of shading and depth. I'm just loving India ink right now and the simplicity of it. It's simple, but at the same time, especially this sepia color has so many little colors and shading variations that come out. Like I will sometimes have blue and brown and gold and everything when I'm thinning the ink and using it for shading. And so I don't know, I love, and there again, that's something that is, I would say, imperfect and unpredictable, and I have embraced that enough in my art and my creating that I love when strange things like that happen. I'm not so good in other areas of my life at letting go of that control, but I've exercised that here enough that I can enjoy that. And so, it's a good, if we can do that in one area of our life, then maybe we can start bringing that into other areas, because certainly most of us would be much healthier if our expectations were just, I say that and it sounds like, well, you just shouldn't have any expectations of yourself, and maybe you won't, maybe that's not, maybe you think, oh, you just won't be someone who tries to do anything or achieve anything. But for some of us who have always had very high expectations, and arguably too high, that becomes paralyzing and damaging at some point. So I'm talking to people who tend to hold themselves to standards that are idealistic or perfectionistic, and I'm talking to a lot of us. Many of us have that issue. And then here I thought I would do, I had these little outlines, and honestly, I'm not loving the shape of the hens, but I think I was going for something, like I said, I've been trying to do more folk art style recently, and I was trying kind of a stylized version of a hen and a rooster. I'm not super happy with these, but like they were good enough. They were fine for today's purposes. And that's another thing that you learn when you're doing anything, is like, you're not going to knock it out of the park every day. There are certain things that I really like about today's piece, and other things that I've done way better other times. And you just have to understand that, like, yeah, nobody hits a home run all the time. Wouldn't even be, well, then that would just be very unexciting. So it would take all of the specialness out of doing it. So, just keep that in mind, that it makes, when you have something really cool happen, it just makes it that much more exciting and special. So I'm just filling these silhouettes in with India ink, and you see, like, my idea is that this looks like just a portion of a an old wall, because I think that kind of old yellowed or brownish tannish envelope looks a lot like an old kind of, well, an old wall that has, that is turned brown with age. And so we've got kind of our wallpaper design going, and so I'm gonna make, out of these little elements here, I'm going to put them in frames to look like framed things on a wall. So I'll do 2 separate silhouettes in oval frames, and then I'll frame the little pig bust, or whatever you want to call that. And then I'll make one other little painting for you that hopefully just gives you an idea of how to do something very small and just keep things small and simple. Like for me, I actually literally keep things small, like almost miniature size, because that's just less intimidating for me. I know that I can do some little small piece of art, and usually most days I can actually accomplish that. And then, so I do have pieces that I wouldn't say are large, like in size. They are larger in terms of like the amount of elements and details and the amount of time that goes into them. I do that. But typically, like just on a daily basis, I'm doing small things, and then I might have one larger long-term project that I'm working at when I have longer work days. So I'm just shading in a tiny bit around these so that they aren't just completely stark white. And those are little pieces of water. The pig is on sketchbook paper, and then the chickens are on like just a scrap of watercolor paper. And then here I'm just going to do a little kind of folk art style donkey. And I like to do folk art style, like I said, because you don't have to be so literal. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do some like actual realistic, more realistic studies. I definitely think, and I've done a lot of those, and I think those are very good too for your learning process. I just think if you're in this stage of coming to drawing where you're still very intimidated and unsure of yourself, then drawing in more of a folk art style is just going to be a lot more accessible and achievable for you, and not so discouraging as doing floral or botanical studies or trying to do a very realistic drawing of a donkey. Now, I definitely think there's a time and place for, taking a photo of your pet and trying to draw a more literal portrait of them. If that's a style of drawing that you ever want to be better at, then yeah, practice that. But if you're just wanting kind of an entryway, an entry point into drawing and painting, then I think doing something that is more stylized and more of an interpretation is a really good place to start. So now I've got, I'll just add a little watercolor to this donkey drawing. It's not my favorite thing. I've drawn donkeys that I liked much better than that one, but he's going to be fine on our little gallery wall here. So all I'm doing is cutting out each little portrait or picture, and then I traced around them, and then I'm just making my frames with just the sepia India ink and a tiny bit of watercolor for a couple of them, then cutting around the outside and cutting out the inside. And then we're just going to add a little Elmer's glue. You could use hot glue, or you could probably just put little bits of masking tape on the backs. But anyway, I put them under a book to dry flat. And make sure that, because the frames were pretty thin, so I didn't know if they would stay stuck down. But now they're dry, and so I'm going to arrange them on my wall. And here's where you see, my tangly hair hanging down in front of the camera. But actually, here's where you see, this didn't work out quite the way I envisioned. Things didn't, all my elements didn't fit. So I said, okay, I'm going to scrap the donkey. I'm not scrapping him. He's just going to sit in my pile, and he may either end up in a letter to someone, or used on another piece. So he's not going to go to waste. But I decided I liked this just with the 3 oval framed pictures. I just thought that looked nicer. So I'm gonna decide where I want them for the final placement, and then I will probably just tape them on for now. I could glue them, and then I would probably add with a little my ink and brush, I would probably just add a little nail above them and a little bit of string or wire looking drawing, just very simple drawing to make them look like they're hanging on a wall. But since I'm not absolutely positive that because I looked at this envelope just without the little frames and I really like that, so I may actually scan the envelope to use for something else, and then decide to go ahead and glue on my little frames and draw in the wire and nails so that they look more like they're hanging as portraits on a wall. But that's what I mean, like nothing has to be set in stone with your art. So just give yourself all kinds of grace and flexibility when you're making, and when you are creating and drawing, just think of it as, if you ever played piano or sport, it's just practice time. You're not in a game, you're not in a performance, at a performance. You are just practicing something because you enjoy it and you want to be better at it. And there's so many benefits to drawing. It opens up all kinds of possibilities for you. It certainly has for me, and I just want other people to understand you can draw. Anyone really can draw. Everyone can draw. So just start small. Don't go for perfection. Don't go for your ideals. Think of it as practice, and think outside the box. Think about what you can do with the things that you're good at. So use your scissors, use your glue, get very creative, and just have fun. Thank you, and happy making.